Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing film discussions, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of... Man, I didn't prepare anything.
I could hear you I don't have a single thing.
Total fear.
This side of the MCU, how about that?
Yes, exactly. And that's a good place to start, because longtime listeners will know Maggie and I do not talk about the MCU unless we particularly have something to say.
Sure.
We've done bonus episodes over on Patreon. We did one about the Deadpool trilogy, but through the lens of Vanessa being the most interesting character and looking at the first film as a cancer movie.
That was very fun.
We talked about a lot of the Spider-Man movies. That was across a couple buffet roundup episodes.
Right. And here we are.
and here we are again to talk about Thunderbolts, which should suggest that we do have something to say, which is weird because when we saw the movie, I like seeing Marvel movies. I like being in that energy. I like being around the crowds. It's fun and it's infectious.
Sure.
And the movies are usually fine or inoffensive or just kind of popcorny.
Or if they're bad, it's in a fun way. Like Madam Web was a delightful experience. Do you know what I mean?
That was grand.
I really liked that.
And when we walked out of Thunderbolts, I don't think either of us had many opinions at all.
No, we were like, that was fine.
It was fine.
That was our main takeaway. That was fine, which was disappointing because the trailers made it seem like it was going to be better than fine.
Great trailers.
Really good trailers.
But I've been chewing on the film in the weeks since we saw it, and I think I have something I really want to talk about specifically with you, Maggie, but of course with the audience as well. And I'm going to start with the thesis instead of building to it because I just want to give you maximum time to chew on it. I think Thunderbolts is a pandemic era period piece.
Interesting.
Like almost a real-time period piece, which makes it so contemporary that I kind of tripped on it and didn't realize it for a few weeks.
Like you mean it's about the pandemic? I mean, not literally, obviously, but...
I think it's about that period, and it's sort of a reckoning and a meditation on this new normal post-pandemic.
Interesting.
It's about that time, and it's about the before and after of what life is like now.
Cool.
Because... the marketing for the film, and I think everyone's reaction walking out of the theater is, oh, it's a superhero movie that cares about mental health.
Sure.
And that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it goes beyond kind of a generalized mental health interest as far as the narrative. I think it goes beyond that into particularly the theme of atomization. Because the mental health that it's dealing with, it's not just like a general PSA of, hey, check in with your... It's not that.
Right.
It's about depression. It's about suicidal ideation, and it's about a prevailing self-sabotaging loneliness.
Yeah.
The more I thought back, especially on every single scene Bob was in, it felt like just a blaring red light thematically throughout the film. And then I realized that the climax of Thunderbolts is everyone in New York City being frozen in time and place, trapped in a small room, reliving their trauma, being forced to reflect and circle the drain indefinitely.
Interesting.
It's lockdown.
I think that makes so much sense. Because for me, I was only reading interestingly, the on the surface metaphor of it all of, we all have to unpack our trauma and sort through our own internal issues and childhoods and move forward and, support each other, which is a great message and is fine. But this is really interesting because that is very adjacent to and connected to the lockdown that you're talking about, but your interpretation is much more specific and I think even more powerful. I
think the film being set in New York really matters here. I don't think it's just generic city backdrop because...
Right, because they could have been in D.C. Sorry, they could have been in D.C. That's where Valentina's from and that's where the last Captain America was and they very much could have set it there. It was sort of strange that they had to go back to NYC for the finale.
And I know that in universe she bought Avengers Tower.
Yeah.
Remember they go there and she lets them in.
Yeah.
But
it didn't have to be there. They were like, no, we got to go to New York. And maybe part of that is to cement the new Avengers as the new Avengers, being in New York and saving New York. But they could have achieved what they wanted, that. They could have achieved that in DC. So
they talk about
that point.
The Battle of New York, which is what they call kind of the civilian devastation of the events of the first Avengers movie.
Yes.
Which is, alien invasion and the Hulk smashing stuff around. And I love that they treat that as a natural disaster.
Like a historical event.
Or almost I mean, almost the way that in our universe we talk about 9/11.
Yeah, it feels a lot like that. Not exactly, obviously,
Of course,
but
yeah.
but it feels parallel. Yeah.
And I loved that there was a scene when Valentina was at that event, and I think Bucky was there, and we were following Valentina's assistant, and it was I think it was some sort of benefit about the Battle of New York, and it felt very 9/11 coded.
Yeah.
So to acknowledge the real life parallels with disasters in New York, and then have a climax that, for me, after the fact, once I had the light bulb moment, totally felt like a pandemic lockdown metaphor. I don't know. I think there's the more we dig into this, I think the more we can find, because I also, when I was thinking about Valentina and what she might represent, because so much of her storyline is specifically about Bob, who is the most lonely. I would say he's the most vulnerable.
Yeah,
Every
definitely.
character seems to discuss mental health or have their own struggle, but I think the point is that Bob is the most kind of teetering on the edge through the film.
Yes, and
Maybe Yelena?
Quietly. Yeah, Yelena for sure,
Maybe,
but she's just our main character. She's our way in, but I don't think she's particularly struggling any more than anybody else. And not that we're comparing, but I think you're right. Bob is kind of in a different place compared to everybody else.
Because if we're looking at before and after period with the pandemic, with lockdown, there are a lot of people, and we both know people in our own lives who the lockdown was really bad for. People who get locked into the internet as almost a full-time job.
Yep.
And get drawn into the worst, nastiest corners of, anything bad on the internet, whether it's culture war or politics
radicalization or
fandom or anything that can get real nasty and real destructive. I think the film reckons with all of those insidious and predatory forces that kind of rushed in to fill our collective, pun intended, void during that time.
Yeah.
I think that's what Valentina is, because she's the one who influences Bob, who leans on Bob, who tries to present herself as the main resource that will help him survive this disaster.
Right.
And she's
preys
the one,
on his vulnerabilities, yeah.
She's the one who exploits him and ultimately transforms him into the Sentry villain, where he looks like Homelander.
Yeah, right.
and I really liked how differently his physical form was when he was reintroduced as Sentry, because it was like he was brute forced into some ideal kind of beauty standard. And I think that's another thing people do. I mean, you talk about the effect Instagram has had on teenagers. I think there's a lot of that there, if Valentina is kind of an allegory for the internet and the influence there.
Interesting.
Because all the people who got devoured by predatory influencers and online stuff and charlatans, the big difference between Bob and Sentry is his attitude. He's so much more hardened when we meet him again, and he meets this crew who loosely became his friends, kind of bonded in the forge of fire, whatever the phrase is. He's so calcified and bitter and dispassionate and selfish. And I think that's a lot of the before and after photo of what the world is like now, post-pandemic and post-lockdown. I think there's been a general kind of calcification on a societal level of us going from being a bunch of Bobs to being a bunch of Sentries.
That's really interesting. Well, and I feel like it's sort of like the like Sentry, what Bob becomes Sentry is sort of like the counterpart to what happens to the new Avengers and the Thunderbolts, sort of like pre and post pandemic, is you can either you become like Bob, like you're saying, like Sentry, where you're self-centered, self-focused, and sort of radicalized and insulated, versus the new Avengers, who sort of like taken that moment or have had the opportunity to, or even been forced to, reckon with themselves, reckon with their past, their issues, their challenges, and sort of reframe and refocus and rework your life and kind of find new purpose after having to put everything on pause, or maybe lose your livelihood or lose the way of life you used to have. Or, everybody lost something in the pandemic, right? So I think that's sort of what's happening, is these new Avengers are forced to, like, I mean, they're in isolation, trapped in that vault, right? They're trapped together. They can't go anywhere. They can't get out. And so they have to sort of reevaluate their lives and themselves. And it ends up being for good, but it takes a struggle. Versus Sentry is the other direction you can go, where it's everything you just laid out. So I like that contrast. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you either turn it inwards or you turn it outwards.
Yeah.
I remember so much of the early marketing for this film, it's a ragtag group of misfits and they're on some sort, the big comparison was Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
Where it feels like, okay, Marvel's doing their version of that after DC's had, 2 of them in the last 10 years. That second one, that James Gunn one, it's really good.
Actually, it was very delightful, yeah.
But I was thinking about that label throughout this story because I think, it feels like kind of a bad joke, but I think if you change the tone in which you say it, Suicide Squad's not a bad label for a lot of these characters.
Yeah.
And the film treats that level of turmoil and mental anguish with a real respect that I appreciated because yes, it was a funny movie and it was an action movie and it's a popcorn thing, but I really liked the character work here because so many of these people are on the margins. A lot of them they're kind of all in existential freefall. Either they're past their prime, they've been cast off from a main team in the way John Walker has been thrown off of, you're going to be Captain America and now you're this national disgrace.
Yeah.
They're all kind of deeply unhappy. And I think that again tracks with post-pandemic, the decreased physical and mental health. I remember all those articles when lockdown was starting about substance abuse and sales of booze, and I remember all of that feeling like a turn for the worse on a societal health level. And I love that that's tracked through all of these characters, not just Bob as kind of this centerpiece where we're going to toy with the metaphor.
Right.
The idea of lost time and changed plans and derailed aspirations. I think a lot of that is what they're doing with John Walker, with the revelations about his wife leaving him.
Yes.
I related to that, and I think a lot of people are going to post-pandemic, even if it's on kind of a subliminal level. And I think this ties into the kind of latest phase of marketing for the film as well, where the asterisk at the end of the title, Thunderbolts, they revealed the new title, the true title, which, works better at the end of the film when you earn it. It kind of spoils it.
Right.
But changing it to the new Avengers, like you just mentioned, I think that's pretty savvy because the film constantly seems to grapple with that comparison. Where everyone in this ragtag group of misfits, I hate that, but that's the shorthand for these type of movies.
Yeah.
Everyone on this team knows they're not the Avengers. And they don't feel like they ever could be. That they're never going to measure up to that, that Battle of New York era Avengers team, again with that forced contrast. But I love that leads to this sense of longing and failure and ennui and the best days are behind us. And it's almost a generational stress and comparison in the same way you have millennials. I was in grad school when the pandemic hit and I missed my graduation. There are people who missed formative years. Their whole college experience. Or they're in elementary school. That feeling of lost time, that feeling of comparison of, man, I'm never going to have the experiences that my older brother, that my parents, that my grandparents had.
And there are so many things now, even like after the pandemic, that aren't the same and can't really ever be the same as they were before. Like, it's not just about the lost, 2 or 3 years in there. It's the way everything has changed since then. There are ramifications that have completely forever altered the span or scope and direction of your life. Our example is that we lived in New York and now we don't, and it's been 5 years and we still don't live there anymore. And if this hadn't happened, not only did we lose all that time in there, we would not be here if it weren't for that, you know? And so that's be here in Texas. I don't mean alive. I mean in Texas. Yeah. But so
I don't know if we said that. We lived in New York during the pandemic,
during
when
the
all
outbreak,
of that started.
And then we left, which we were very lucky to be able to do, but it was not what we wanted to do. And so it was a huge loss.
It reminded me a little bit of kind of the thesis statements in the pilot of The Sopranos, where I think it's maybe it's a voiceover or something where Tony is talking about that feeling of coming in at the end of things.
Yeah.
Again, that kind of generational ennui that I think really does saturate a lot of the best American pop culture.
Yes.
I think that constant reckoning with identity is an incredibly American thing in the art world. And I love that this movie, I'm not calling it The Sopranos, but I'm saying it felt similarly grounded and messy and ugly and in the darkness of a theater shockingly relatable.
Yeah, it was really powerful and like not at all what I expected it to be. Like again, because the marketing just really sold us a different thing. I knew it was going to be a little like darker and grimmer than your average Marvel movie, which is like why I was excited. But I thought it was going to be like gritty and punchy, almost like John Wick. I don't know, some kind of like, I don't know, grounded grim darkness or something, but like in a fun way. But instead it was like, oh, it's just grim and not all that fun. Like obviously there was humor in this, like you were saying, but it was just that ennui you're talking about, I think is the perfect way to describe it. It just felt kind of mournful and sad.
Yeah.
But not in a sappy or overly emotional way, the way that a lot of other MCU movies have been.
No, and most of them end with a big third act action sequence.
Right.
And it's a bunch of aspirational heroes taking down a big bad guy and doing feats of strength that are impossible for mere mortals to imagine.
Right.
The finale of Thunderbolts, the great aspirational fantasy at the end of this movie, is just friendship.
Yeah.
It's a singular moment of compassion and contact and acceptance. Mm-hmm. And it felt so appropriate and special. Because I've seen other movies, superhero movies that have gone for this type of finale that end with some sort of hug that, the power of friendship.
Right.
And it sounds shitty when you say it like that, but it so worked here. Because it wasn't, the movie wasn't, I didn't find the movie funny, particularly.
I didn't either. It wasn't my kind of humor.
A lot of it was, as diehard Veep fans, I think this was just the worst version of Selena Meyer.
I was going to say, it's the worst episode of Veep you've ever seen. That's what this was.
And the humor with the other characters worked better.
Yeah. But it still wasn't that funny. But
I think the usual MCU humor, the quippiness, I think most of that in universe comes from a place of confidence.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where it's character, Tony Stark, most confident character in the known universe, right? So his quippiness is from that calm, quirky, suave playboy kind of thing. And I loved that the humor here came from such a different, darker place because the sincerity rolled through the humor into that finale where having the power of friendship be the big reveal, it felt earned.
Yeah.
It felt serious. It felt grounded. It didn't feel like a cheap kind of cereal box fake out.
Right. Like the one moment of humor that I think did really work was when, what's his name? Red Guardian, when he's checking in on Yelena, he says, you seem like down or closed off even by Eastern European standards or something like that. And like, that was like the one line that made me laugh. It's too bad it was like in the first 20 minutes of the movie, but that was exactly what you're talking about. It was serious and I feel like the way somebody would actually talk, because he's right. Like Eastern Europeans don't tend to open up about their feelings all that much. And so he's sort of like being self-aware and aware of his is it his daughter? I don't
Yelena?
know. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. She calls him dad like once, so I didn't know. Whatever.
I think it's a strained relationship.
Okay, great. So, he's trying to reach out to her, but also like through this awkwardness and hiding behind the lens of humor, which is what a lot of people do who are uncomfortable with being vulnerable and open. So like that really worked with like the seriousness and mild humor of the movie. And I wish the rest of it had been like that.
To tie it back to that central metaphor though about friendship, in the 2025 era, friendship is almost a battleground. I think it's similarly increasingly rare and valuable.
Yes.
Most people seem to have fewer friends than they did before the pandemic.
Definitely.
And that whole concept of friendship, as we are atomized and all kind of battle-scarred on the other side of lockdown and all the accompanying messes, there's more and more forces in the world trying to exploit our need for friendship. I'm thinking about stuff like AI and AI chatbots that try to be your friends or like resurrect dead family members in a VR thing.
Yeah.
Like there's so much preying on that basic need for friendship that I found the representation of that, like elevating one act of basic human friendship to being the climax of a superhero film, that didn't feel crazy in 2025.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, that loneliness was present during the pandemic, absolutely, like for obvious reasons, but it has continued since then. It's been 5 years since everything shut down, and people are still feeling incredibly lonely and isolated in ways that they didn't before.
Because we lost tactile human communication.
Right.
And now that we technically have it back, it still feels threatened from all of this new shit we've invented to almost force it to extinction.
And we all got comfortable, like, especially, like, there's the running joke that introverts loved the lockdown because, like, we kind of did because we got to stay home all the time and never had to leave the house.
That doesn't mean it's good for you.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So we got used to staying home all the time as normal and, like, never going out. And, like, now it feels like a much bigger deal to try to go back out. And and not to mention there are still health concerns that abound in many places. So it's like, everybody's still so lonely because of everything that happened and is continuing to happen, and it's just perpetuating, getting worse and worse. So you're right, that message does ring true here in a way that it might have felt really strange and almost trite 6 years ago.
Oh, totally. I don't think this movie would be made, I don't think it would be thought of in the same way 6 years ago. And that's why I think it feels so like a product of its time. The movie doesn't talk about COVID, but I think it's...
or illness or isolation. Like, nobody uses those words,
But it's so there.
Yeah.
And the second I connected the dots of everyone being trapped in a small room in New York to deal with their demons.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, frozen in time is what really got me. Because, everything just paused in the saddest, weirdest way.
It's the particularity of the mental health interest. It's about the climactic power of friendship. It's all of these forces on the margins that I think are embodied in Valentina. I think all of this makes Thunderbolts, I mean, it's fine as an MCU movie, but I think it's fascinating as kind of a bookmark in history and a real-time period piece.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I love this assertion. You told me you had a great idea about it, and you said it was personal, and I thought, okay, it's probably going to be about the mental health stuff. This will be interesting. But I think
I said idea, not great idea. That's up to everyone else.
Okay, well, every time, back up. When you tell me you have an idea, I assume it's great. So that's what it is. That's what it is, because it usually is. Well, this is really interesting. We talked about another movie as a pandemic movie. We talked about Pearl over on the Patreon.
Oh, I forgot
Remember?
about that.
Because that was, so Ty West did X, Pearl, and then Maxine recently. And
we talked about all three on the Patreon.
We did, and we were really struck by, I remember I especially was struck by Pearl as being about the pandemic. And that was made during the pandemic. And I think there's like a very strong argument about it. But it's not overt or obnoxious, but it's very much there.
What a movie that was.
Yeah, that was a great movie, man. And what a movie Maxine was not, but that's for a different day.
2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Yeah, that's right.
And this feels like a good moment to announce that we've actually put a lot of work and time into our next MCU episode, which is going to be live on Patreon this Sunday. Awesome. That's when that'll release. It's the next installment of the Breakfast Buffet Roundup series. We rewatched all 4 Captain America movies, and we both realized that Bucky is by far our favorite MCU character.
Absolutely.
So we have a whole ration of thoughts, theories, literary analysis of all 4 of those movies together and individually. There's a ton we're going to break down over there with Bucky as kind of our North Star in those discussions. So please check that out over on Patreon. $2 a month. You can support the show and get access to the whole vault of back catalog of episodes.
Yes, and through the month of May this year, we have been putting out a bonus episode every single weekend, every single Sunday, to celebrate the 5-year anniversary of this show. So thank you to those who have been here for the last 5 years, and if not, we got 5 years worth of content for you to catch up on. So go check it out. Ooh, I just said content. We got 5 years worth of discussions for you to check out.
You know what really isn't content?
Your latest book, Lemon Tarts in Space. If you like hearing about dark things through a funny lens, Cam's latest book is Monty Python Meets Alien. It is so much fun. It is a light sci-fi dark comedy ride through space. It's about friendship. It's also about cancer, and it's about loss, and it's about grief, and it's about trauma, and it's about all kinds of things. It's a delightful experience. You can read it as a regular book, as a novel, or you can listen to the audio drama, which is a full-on production. It's not just an audiobook. It's got a whole thing going. So please check both of those out. The link for that is in the description down below.
We did an interview series about that.
Yeah, we did.
When the book released, about the different parts of the creative process there. And in that, I think I discussed a little bit how much the pandemic and its similarities with the artist's life, with how solitary and strange and insecure it is, how those parallels influence the book. So there's some crossover with some of the themes we discussed today.
Definitely. That would be part 1 of that interview series, because that was about the writing. So cool. Thank you guys so much for checking that out. Thank you very much for listening. If you like this episode, please give it a like and subscribe on whatever platform you're on. Just click the buttons to tell the thing that you like us, because it really helps us out. Cool. Well, I can't keep up with whatever do you follow? Do you add? Do you subscribe? I don't care anymore. Just
We're-
click on the buttons, please.
Between us, we're way too old for that.
Way too old. Cool. All right. We'll catch you guys here in a few days with another brand new episode.